driving through downtown Homs, which historically is the neighborhood where the Christians live, was a pretty stark experience. The center of the city completely bombed out. The priest, the head of the parish from Homs that I met, described how the center of the town where the Christians lived, and they had fled in large part because they were pushed out by the rebels.
Journalist Flavius Mahays in Syria, describing what Christians are facing in that war-torn country. The video, part of a presentation chronicling the efforts of an organization known as Solidarity with the Persecuted Church. That organization aims to build a bond between free Christians and those suffering from persecution. For more, we're very pleased to be joined from Newsmax Washington by the co-founder and president of Solidarity with the Persecuted Church, Stephen Wagner. Stephen, we very much appreciate your time tonight on Newsmax Prime.
Thank you, JD. Good evening, and thank you for the invitation.
Well, we take a look at Syria. As I understand it, only about 10% of that nation is Christian, but 1 million Christians are living there right now in continual fear of ISIS and this ongoing civil war. What are you hearing from the Christian community there in Syria?
That's right, JD. And this is the frustrating thing about the situation in Syria, is that you hear talk of the Assad government, you hear talk about the opposition. Nobody is speaking about the 1 million Christians who are very vulnerable. These are the folks who are going to suffer the most if we don't get the transition to a democratic regime right. And I'm very concerned that there really is no opposition force that could take over that country and make room for the Christians. So they're really on the knife's edge there in Syria.
And we go just across the border to Iraq, to a little community known as Al-Qash. It's a Christian community just 9 miles from ISIS territory, facing threats on a daily basis. Father Gabriel of the Monastery of Our Lady in Al-Qash says they need the collective Christian community to help. Here's what he had to say.
I call on all of our Christian brothers and sisters throughout the world to help the Christians suffering in Iraq because of Islamic extremism and protect them from extinction in this country. The Kurdistan regional government has been remarkable during this crisis. They are the only government that has protected Christians and provided them with food and other essential supplies.
So we hear, courtesy of a narrator, Father Gabriel there saying the Kurdish government, the only government actively stepping in to help. What about the governments in the West, and specifically our government here in the United States?
Well, JD, I'm optimistic about the situation in Iraq. The government of Baghdad has promised to retake that main city of Mosul within the year. And if Mosul is retaken, then it means that the Christian enclaves on the Nineveh Plain near the town of Al-Qash will be liberated as well. So I'm very optimistic that we're going to have an opportunity to see Christians going home before the year is out. Now, it's been 2 years, so they have suffered long and hard. But the end, I hope, is in sight, and then becomes the really tough task of rebuilding those Christian communities that have been decimated by the Islamic State.
You know, Stephen, you mentioned Mosul, and I had the chance to visit, over a decade ago when I was serving in Congress. And as I understand it, you mentioned the Nineveh Plain. We think Mosul is Nineveh in the Bible, where Jonah was supposed to go, and we know all the story about Jonah. So I think the thing we stress, while the people are most important, these are places mentioned in the Bible, and historically, these are some of the first Christians who are facing the persecution at the hands of ISIS and other Islamic terror groups.
That's right. It's a very ancient community, the Christian community of Iraq and Syria. As you know, there were already Christians in Damascus when Paul showed up. He was sent to be baptized on Straight Street, from which Flavius reported in Damascus. Straight Street is still there. And so it's a great tragedy all around if we don't stand up for the Christians and ensure a continued Christian presence in these countries. And that really is what should be the objective of U.S. policy in the region, is to ensure that Christians and other religious minorities, like the Yazidis, who have been officially declared to be victims of genocide, have a place, and we need to start defending their interests. For example, there's a peace negotiation going on in Geneva regarding the future of Syria. There are no Christians in the peace negotiations, so the United States needs to be the one to stand up and ensure that the outcome of those negotiations is something literally that Christians can live with.
And you mentioned the fact that the United States needs to try and ensure some Christian representation. We are seeing actions against Christians, violent actions, moving now to Western Europe. Of course, we saw the brutal murder in Normandy of that French priest. It was interesting, Pope Francis, after that murder, responded by saying, quote, "The world is at war because it has lost peace," but also stressed this is, quote, referring to Islam, and the situation there, this is not a war of religion. Stephen, do you agree with the pontiff in that regard?
Well, I think he was making a narrow and specific point. Let me say this about it. It's very clear that what the Islamic State is doing is an interpretation of Islam, and it's a legitimate interpretation of Islam. So it is not possible for us to say, as barbaric as you people are, as horrible as your actions, you are violating Islam, because they aren't. Now, it's only one interpretation of Islam. It's not the only possible interpretation. Islam can indeed be a religion of peace. And I think the Holy Father was probably trying to say that he cannot countenance a war between Christianity and Islam. He's trying to say that's not what's going on. But in point of fact, we do have a struggle going on against a branch of Islam, against people who choose to interpret their faith in a special and, as I say, barbaric way.
And of course, you mentioned the Islamic State. We call it ISIS. The Islamic State produces a magazine. The latest cover of that magazine targets Christians. The theme of the issue of the magazine is breaking of the cross. Does this drive home the point, or should it drive home the point to congregations here in the United States that ISIS and others like ISIS within the Islamic faith want to eliminate Christians?
And according to the Quran, they shouldn't be doing that, should they? We Christians, along with our Jewish brothers and sisters, should enjoy a special status as people of the book. But the Islamic State seems to have thrown that interpretation away. And so, yes, JD, it's a declaration of war, and we need to be realistic when we look at what's going on there. And you know, another source of unrealism has been our reliance on allies like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Qatar. Well, you know what's going on in Turkey today. And these are not countries that envision, for example, a Syria that has a place for Christians. We need to start realizing that our interests are not consistent with the interests of Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and that we are committed to preserving the Christian presence in these countries.
In closing, what is the best way for those watching tonight to get in touch with your organization and lend a hand?
Well, you're very kind to ask. Solidarity with the Persecuted Church has a website, which is www.solidaritypersecutedchurch.org. We have a wonderful Facebook presence, and you can find it through the same name. And we accept contributions in the United States.
That is great, and we see it right here, Stephen. I'm sorry the clock has taken a great bit of our time, but we thank you tonight, Stephen Wagner from Washington.